regards to Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be the similarities?
It's not easy questions. I imagine there might be some differences, but it would be really hard for me to identify them without giving this some more thought. I think women see the world perhaps in a different way, and that kind of difference would produce a different response to the environment. Exactly how that would manifest itself, I think I need more time to answer.
All right. Second question is, given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in other typically male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, LA, etc. increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact will this have for the 21st century?
Are the number of women's
Yes.
careers increasing? I would think that number is increasing. What was the next part?
What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on whether it be architecture, planning, or landscape architecture, the three design fields? What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on those three fields?
I think it's a better representation of the real world, so it could only be positive. I mean, I think things will be more realistically represented in better balance.
Okay. Great.
Is that the right answer?
Hey. If architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings, as well as in the practice of architecture?
I think that's a difficult question because everyone designs differently, and you shouldn't deal clumping it in genders, just men and women. But you have to look at the backgrounds and race and culture. I have done some research in this, and I do think there would be some differences. I don't know in structure and form, but there are some questions about how comfortable women feel in public spaces in those areas, and I'm sure there will be some differences there.
Okay. Given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in the typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, LA, etc. increasing? If so, if not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think this will have for the 21st century?
The numbers are increasing, but I still think, I saw a statistic, I think it was 1993, that it was still less than 5% of architects in the United States were registered were women. So it's still a fairly low number. Eventually, I mean, I think the numbers are increasing, and I think it will begin to equal out a little more. And I'm sure that will have some impact on our environment, our built environment. I mean, everyone designs differently. I'm sure, as I said before, gender, race, culture, everything influences how you design.
All right, thank you. In society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of the similarities?
This is a tough question. I think there probably would be a difference.
Okay.
And I think we'd have to go and make a couple big assumptions that a feminine versus masculine point of view may be maybe what we're talking about. One, a focused approach and a diffused awareness might
Okay.
be the differences. It seems that and valuing a change in valuing system, I think would be I think it's underway right now, actually. But I think that would be one of the main differences, and the valuing would be from a more feminine point of view, or feminine energy would deal with cooperation, sharing,
Right.
a perhaps a longer term picture on sustaining life.
Okay.
Less competition, more cooperation. A move actually from a pyramidal hierarchical structure where someone is on top, and moving on to more of a circular model where people can lead and then step back in and support one another, would be based on more fairness, equality, humanism, etc. So
Okay.
I could see that would be a change. How architecture would be practiced would be a slow change, and there would probably be less emphasis on the sort of a cultural object detached from human life.
Okay.
And as you know, the artifact that's a museum piece versus a place that supports and sustains life. So now, whether that's, I think it's unfair to say that that's solely a feminist view versus
Okay.
a masculine view.
Mhm.
But if we go ahead and make those divisions,
Mhm.
saying that we're really dominated by a European patriarchal model where power over either from the church and stamping out of more pluralistic societies is underway, and has been,
Mhm.
been our history.
Okay. Second question. Given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in other typically male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think that'll have on the 21st century?
I think it's increasing, and the only reason that I noticed that from the length of time that I've been teaching.
Mhm.
So I think it's increasing both here and in other countries. Second part of the question is, what is the impact?
Yes.
I think the impact is one of diversity and pluralism.
Right.
And that's sort of important.
Okay.
I think it's very important.
Okay.
And it also tapped into a change of heart and paradigm change. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Do the first one?
In Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be the similarities?
Okay. Because of the nature of the designer, I don't think that architecture as a profession would be very much different. The mind of the designer is a really interesting thing, and I think it works the same way whether it's in the head of a man or the head of a woman. But I have had some people talk to me about it before and point out some things that they think are assets that women have as designers that some men don't, and that's a sensitivity to emotions
Mm-hmm.
that some women just have a better feel for the way spaces can make someone feel than some men do. I think that could be because of characteristics of a man and a woman, the differences between the way they nurture things. But as a whole, the profession I don't think would be very much different. And I do think that women are getting more involved in the profession. They are making their voices heard. They're getting into higher positions as professionals. And I think most men are accepting of that and are moving over to share space with them.
Mm-hmm.
There are still a few men in the field who don't feel like they belong there. just like my experience with my internship. And I worked with 14 men and 1 woman, and was discriminated against in salary until I spoke up and said this was not right, and then they leveled everything out. It was interesting to work in an office with that kind of balance, because I definitely had to hold my own at times, but I did okay, especially after being in a studio with 12 guys and 1 girl.
Yeah.
They set me up real good for that experience.
Right. All right. Well, you kind of answered the second question, but maybe something else will spin off of it. Given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, LA increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think this will have on the 21st century?
I think architecture can only get better. But like I said, the mind of a designer is going to be the same way whether it's a man or a woman. And there may be some women out there that are very good designers who've never thought about being in the field before. There can be women that are exposed to teaching to prepare them for design that haven't been exposed to that kind of teaching before. And in the same way, all different kinds of people who haven't had that experience, just certain minorities in them, are going to be opened up to a method of learning that is going to prepare them for working in a design field. And I think the profession will have a better balance and representation of backgrounds. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
All right. Thank you.
No problem.
In Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? And if yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of the similarities?
I guess I don't think that our physical environment would be that different based upon the gender switch dominated by females. There could be some, I think we all approach design problems in very similar fashions. I don't know if that's male-oriented or female-oriented.
Okay.
It's, I guess, based on how each individual's mind works and how their history, their individual history of experiences is brought into that.
Right.
So I guess I disagree with the idea that women ultimately design differently. One thought I have that might break down the difference between men and women and how they practice a design profession is that women might, because of their way of relating within other individuals, might practice architecture differently in terms of the client relationships.
Okay.
And again, these are generalizations. I hate making generalizations, but a man might, in a client format, if I'm exchanging information, might be more confident in convincing the client that their ideas were the correct one, and a woman could do that also. I guess maybe looking at myself, I would be more receptive to their input and less domineering, I guess.
Okay. All right. Second question. Given the number of women in school and increasing numbers in other typical male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think this will have on the 21st century?
Given that the number of women in school is increasing, are there more women in the profession? Is that also increasing?
Yeah, you can take that perspective. Yeah.
Is that the question? Or
well, just asking if since the number of women is increasing in school, do you think that and in the amount of women in typically male professions is increasing, do you think that is going to take place in the three design disciplines,
Uh-huh.
being that it's starting to snowball
Right,
now.
right. Increase over, of course, I think it's going to increase. Are you asking, is it going to, are women eventually going to dominate these professions?
No, but just overall.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, just looking at historic trends, I think there's more, this is a viable profession for everybody, so I would imagine women be coming into it in a lot greater numbers.
Right.
What is that? What's the point of that question? Seeing how,
If a lot of schools have varying amounts of women either in their student population or in their faculty population. So, in my mind, it was a little hard to get an idea of. Obviously, women are increasing in both parts, but it was hard to see that from my point of view because I haven't seen the past.
I see.
And,
Right.
and whereas some of the faculty and some of the professionals have been there to see that at one point there was virtually none, and and now there are definitely more women in both the profession,
Right.
any of the three professions,
Right.
as well as the student body, and just a personal perception of how.
Is this change occurring?
Yes,
Or is it-
and how dramatic do you think it is,
Right.
in your own view?
I think it is, I guess my knowledge is primarily learned or observed in statistics.
Okay.
I know that, for instance, when I went to graduate school, our class had about 40% women, 35 to 40% women, which was a very, I was told, a much larger proportion than in previous classes. So, and yeah, it's hard to see very small incremental changes occurring. It's because you tend to compensate for that, and you don't actually see the shift. But I think
Okay.
it is statistically occurring.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
In regards to Western society, if landscape architecture, or planning were female-dominated professions, would there be a difference in the structural and form of our public and private dwellings or spaces, as well as the practice of those professions? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of the similarities? Either way.
I guess we say no, that it's not as much a gender thing as it is more of your background and your environment and what you grew up with. There are biases and there are stereotypes to each one, but even within those, there's things that cross over. Like me, I grew up in a family of engineers, and so I tend to think more structurally, or what would be a stereotype of a male. But then someone else, maybe a male that grew up with a landscape architecture family, or just a gardening family, they tend to fit more the stereotype of a female type design. What else do you think?
I think also that when you're looking at the professions, the profession of architecture and the profession of landscape architecture, in essence, have separate design characteristics to begin with. Architectural design involves more structural, pragmatic thinking that certain things must be included, certain systems that must incorporate into a building, and that tends to be a more male stereotype where you're more functional, more pragmatic, whereas a female supposedly designs more holistically, more nurturing. And maybe in an architectural setting you will see that difference because more males will cater to these specific architectural elements and a female might concentrate less. Whereas landscape architecture, I think the design principles teach you to think more holistically about an environment or a landscape. So therefore the men are taught to think holistically, quote, female, which is, quote, a, quote, female characteristic. So therefore we see people that do exhibit male characteristics of design and female design characteristics. So I think the profession itself also lends itself to whether or not these male-female characteristics will occur.
As far as specifically in design, if you can tell a female design versus a male design, I don't think that you can, because there's levels within the male design. You know, each of them have a different style, and you can look at females and you see that same, you know, the different styles. I don't think you can differentiate between the two of them.
Okay. Given the number of women in school and increasing numbers in other typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, landscape architecture, etc., increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think this will have on the 21st century?
I think they are increasing, but it's slow. It's happening very slowly. And I think you see it more in government and the state offices than you do in private, because they're the ones that are pushing more towards, you know, equality. They have to meet quotas or, you know, that type of thing.
I also agree that women are encroaching on the profession slowly but surely, and that it will impact it definitely will impact the profession, all three professions. I think they're going to we will bring new approaches, new viewpoints, new perspectives, and that eventually the males will learn from us and we will learn from them. There will always be differences, but we will approach an equality eventually when the numbers become more equal.
I think that another thing we need to remember is we're designing spaces for people, male and female.
Right.
So we need both viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
We need both
Definitely.
styles. We need, you know,
Right.
the different levels of the male and the female to provide spaces for people, not just
Right.
one type of person.
Right. I know one thing off the cuff here. Something that was mentioned to me earlier this morning is that sometimes dealing with spaces, whether it be landscape architecture or planning of the open space in general, it was brought to my attention this morning that sometimes a majority of women don't feel comfortable in these open spaces or in these public spaces. Can you guys touch on any of that, or does it ring a bell for you? Or
Maybe the levels of appreciation are different. It depends on what kind of space we're dealing with, whether it's a historic landscape or
Okay.
a hard urban space. Maybe a man does feel more comfortable in a hard urban space.
Right.
However, many women might feel comfortable there and many men might not.
Okay.
So maybe that's another instance where lines may be crossed.
Right.
Technically, urban spaces are harder, more male, whereas small garden intimate spaces would be catered more toward the female.
Right.
So that could be, I think that might also hold true, but then again, I feel completely comfortable in a hard urban space.
And that's because, like, you grew up more in a city
Suburban,
type environment,
urban,
yeah.
right.
And I grew up like more towards in the country,
Mhm.
and so, you know, I feel more comfortable out in the middle of a field,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, in the middle of a park in the middle of a city. So
Right.
there again, you know, it has to do with your environment and your background
And
a lot
scale.
too. Yeah.
Right.
You know, the grandioseness when you walk into a building or into a situation and there's a large scale, and women might tend to feel more comfortable in an intimate setting. Men might feel like they are grand and, you know, want bigger, more elaborate spaces for themselves.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well, thank you very much. If architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be the similarities?
Okay. You have to know that in my background, I was a student of architecture, of a school of architecture, which was very numerous in terms of the number of students and professors. We're talking about a school who has 12,000 students in 2 shifts, and that's the population of the School of Architecture of Buenos Aires, where approximately 60% or more are female students, and many of the instructors are female instructors. Therefore, for me, it was a surprise when I came here in 1981. At that time, there were
Right.
no females at all. I just had one female student, my third-year student. She was a very good designer, She was a black American woman, very interesting person. I would say I was shocked.
Right.
Okay, but at the same time, I was bored. It was total boredom. The dialogue wasn't as rich as I was accustomed to discuss with people, and I'm sure that if we include diversity in any profession, there is immediate enrichment that occurs in the discussion, in intellectual discussion, and in whatever we will produce out of it.
Exactly.
Then, yeah, I agree. It's going to benefit tremendously. Architecture will be better.
Okay. Second question. Given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in the typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact will this have on the 21st century?
It is increasing. I mean, this is noticeable. It took a long time to start to take off, but I think it's visible now that it is increasing, thanks God. And it's much better. I hope it continues in this way, and is more reflective of society from wherever place the School of Architecture is. I believe that the population of the school should be somehow a reflective of the population of the real world outside. And the reflection towards the 21st century is that today we know, and it is accepted in international arenas, that harmonious development and sustainable development happens through women. They are the ones who really put the whole thing together in our communities, in our families. And they are really the major actors of social development. And in that regard, I think that, yes, it's going to have a tremendous impact because they have the access and the podium to speak.
Okay. What about you mentioned in Buenos Aires, you mentioned the percentage was in favor of women, both in students and in faculty. Do you see that changing? Is that presently changing, evening out, or does it stay predominantly women, both student-based and faculty? Is there a fluctuation
there? It's a long time I haven't been in Argentina, but I can say that I may know as many women architects than men architects, directly related to me. Therefore, it seems that it's stabilizing now. I don't think that it's going to become necessarily an exclusive women profession. It seems to me that there was a very big interest, and then maybe that provided for a momentum. And now it's what it's going to be. I mean, what is curious is that at that time there was no question that it was happening. It was like that. I think it was because the culture. I don't know the exact reason why it happened. That architecture in Argentina, for example, was almost, I won't say female dominated, but the balance was very, very open, and therefore the question of the women's being accessible. I may say that yes, the construction side of architecture was less porous to the participation of women. It was somewhat like the idea of women, I don't know if it was intentional or it was precluding them, but it didn't happen as it happened in the intellectual academic arena or in the design, in the studios. In the studios, there was pretty much like a balance between people working, women or men. They are notorious in Argentina and I think in the US too, but they are notorious critics of architecture. One is curiously is Marina Weissman, which is a similar name but with an A, and she's a fantastic critique and the driving force of the architectural magazine, the best in Latin America, which is called Circa. Therefore, they have a real voice.
As far as Argentina is concerned, some of the things that have been brought to my attention through classes here at Ball State, as well as through doing some of these interviews, were the social stigmas in this country, where certain design elements in residences or in architecture in general are affiliated with certain genders, such as the kitchen being the woman's space, the garage or workshop being the man's space, and the den being a man's space. Are there similar social stigmas in Argentina, or is that, can you comment on that?
Yes, but I think that's a very broad arena of discussion.
Right.
I would say, like the French say, vive la différence, not because I think that women should be in the kitchen at all. I think that any activity is worthy of any individual. But yes, I think that to just make the whole thing neutral is not either a solution.
Right.
And what I will try to discuss is the issue of diversity, and therefore, yes, I think that women will design differently. Yes, I think that maybe the space qualities should be discussed in a different term. I don't think that there is any necessary mandate in terms of saying, oh, the kitchen is for the women. But culturally speaking, if you took the Arab culture, for example, which were the ones that really put the women in a totally marginal societal position, and where even the harem was existing or things like that, yes, the design was totally based on the segregation of the women from the public arena. But then at the same time, sometimes it was like the nicest space in the house, or the most ornate space in the house. Therefore, I think we shouldn't just look at the negatives, we look at the positives, and if looking at the positives then enrich the process, then I would say that diversity really is encouraging that. I don't think that a woman should be a man or vice versa, and I welcome the inclusion of everyone or every culture in the process.
Right. All right. In Western society, if architecture or any of the three design fields were female-dominated professions, would there be a difference in the structure and form of public and private dwellings, as well as the practice of those professions? If no, why not? And if yes, what would some of those differences and similarities be?
Well, to begin with, I'm not sure why you're limiting it to the three design professions that exist in this building. To enact any change within these design professions would entail a much larger change in society overall. So, I base my answer on the fact that there have been much larger changes in society overall, and what happens in this building is an extreme microcosm of the truth. But this is 1994, and we're living in a post-ERA, post-civil rights, post-sexual revolution society, and the question of the difference between male and female design, male and female architecture, male and female economic theories is becoming increasingly irrelevant. We know that we can be anything we want, and you as a man know that you can be anything that you want, and all we have to do is go out and get it.
Right.
The differences between designers, between architects, go hand in hand with the differences between clients and between society.
Okay.
Male and female is becoming less of an issue.
All right. Well, then that would lead perfectly into the second question of, given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in other typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture planning, landscape architecture increasing? If not, why not? And if yes, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on the 21st century?
Without any empirical figures in front of me, I'm really not sure. In my observation, just in the last few years, it really hasn't. I don't know what it was doing before me, and I don't know what the large trends are. My opinion of the impact of it is that it really doesn't matter. It's not. That's not what it's all about anymore.
male and women designers designed for men and women designers designed for men and women clients designed for a society that consists of men and women. In Western society, that's the way it is. In other societies, that's different. In other societies, I wouldn't be able to get a job. I would have to sit in a hole with an abaya around my head for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But this is not that kind of place, and I think that whatever happens to the numbers, it's pure demographics, and it's purely reliant on individuals' choices. I don't think that there will be any impact.
Okay. Just on improv here, Leslie Keynes Wiseman has pointed out some views in her book on social stigmas of spaces being more female or more male, being, for example, like the kitchen being stereotypically the woman's space, the den or the workshop, woodshop type area being the male space. Do you see that today still in architecture, landscape architecture, or planning, that type of thing? Do you see those? Do you believe that those stigmas exist, or?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
You should see my kitchen and you should see my workshop.
Okay.
There's quite a dichotomy there. If I had my way, if I had the space in my rental unit, then my kitchen would consist of my garden and very little else. But unfortunately, I don't have my way, so my kitchen consists of a countertop with a plant and a rotten jug of milk and dirty dishes piled up on all sides and crab that was spilled there years ago and a container of chili that has become rotten. And I don't like to clean, and as long as it doesn't smell, I don't clean. And as long as nobody comes in who's going to look at that and dislike it, I don't care. Whereas in my workshop, I take a lot more care about how I handle things, and I have a lot more respect for power tools than I do for dirty dishes. I think that most women who have experienced these two things side by side might feel the same way. I don't know what that has to do with design, but it's just, once again, a matter of individual choice. It's just, once again, of course there are women who spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and I do like to cook, I just don't like to clean. It's, you know, but then there are men who like to cook too.
Right.
Right. I'm not very comfortable with stereotyping these things. This is, and I am privileged and happy to be living in an era when I can say proudly that I think we can get by without the stereotypes.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, or any of the three professions were female-dominated, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of that profession? If no, why not? And if yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of those similarities?
Okay, great question. I have two reactions that sort of happen simultaneously. One is that I am uncomfortable with categorizing or stereotyping people in broad groups, because there are always individual exceptions.
Exactly.
But I would say that considering that up until maybe the last 20 or 30 years in Western society, that based on our gender or our race or our economic class, that there has been a tendency for us to be socialized in certain ways, and there are expected roles that we have, then I would say initially, yes, there would be a big impact as women from the three design professions start coming into academia and professions. Although I would also, well, it was the rallying cry in the 60s with the Vietnam War that if women ruled the world, we wouldn't have wars, and now we see that there are women in the military. Now what we don't know is whether wars would be fought differently with women in the military, but as we start breaking down stereotypes and role expectations, what I see is that maybe what in the past were individual exceptions might start becoming the norm, regardless of the gender or the race or the economic class. So we would become
Okay.
aware of a diversity
Right.
of issues.
Right.
One of the things, though, I think that initially will happen is that as a group, I find that women, maybe because of their expected role with the family, tend to think a bit more holistically on
Right.
the impact of what I do has on someone else, and it may be our children, it may be our spouses. Well, there is a way of linking that, obviously, to design issues in the built
Right.
environment.
Right.
I think, though, as men and women start sharing those concerns and those roles, we'll all start thinking, hopefully, a bit more holistically.
Right.
So I guess that would be...
That brings up another question. Through these interviews this morning, through some landscape architecture students, they voiced almost that same opinion, that they said that in landscape architecture, there's a good variation from architecture in that, in their opinion, men tend to think more pragmatically and more, I can't quote them directly, but whereas the women tended to think more holistically, and that this fit the overall consensus of landscape architecture to consider things on a larger scale, to consider things, to bring more things into that perspective, to consider more things, and that they were saying that in general, the men were having to learn how to think that way of what was, typically they were saying the woman's point of view. They were having to learn how to think that way, whereas the women already had that skill. They were also saying that they thought that if you had placed two designs next to each other, that one individual said that you would not be able to tell the difference between a design that had been designed by a man and one that had been designed by a woman. The other person thought that sometimes you might be able to tell because of the issues that certain people are bringing into it, that their perspectives may bring certain things into that design that are from a woman's point of view. So some of those things are tying in with your comments as well.
The only thing I would perhaps add is that I think that thinking holistically is not divorced or separate from thinking pragmatically.
Okay.
Because I think that actually thinking holistically can be incredibly pragmatic. One of the things might be is with holistic thinking, I think you're thinking a bit broader and a bit longer term, that you start understanding there are implications beyond solving the specifics of a very focused issue. And that's what I mean by holistics, and that it doesn't exclude pragmatism. It actually broadens our notion of what is pragmatic, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, I kind of follow you there. Second question. Given the number of women in school and increasing numbers in the typically male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? If so, what kind of impact do you think that will have in the 21st century?
Yeah, another interesting and tough question. I know when I was looking for a school to do my professional degree, the makeup of the student body was very important to me, and I went to a program where half of my classmates were women, and there was a broad range of ages and a broad range of backgrounds, and I found that to be incredibly healthy.
Right.
So in some ways it was a bit of a surprise to me to then go into well, not so much profession, because I'd actually practiced before going back to school, so I knew that there weren't as many women in the profession at that time. But it was a surprise to me going into academia to find that the number of women on the faculty and in administrative positions was not anywhere near the number of women that were in the student body.
Okay.
So there is a lapse there. I'm not exactly sure why. Perhaps it's just the whole issue of tenure and turnover and the number of faculty that are hired. I do see that changing, and I guess the answer to this question is very closely related to the first answer. I think as more women enter the profession as students, as faculty, and as professionals, in the same way that I think that as the profession just broadens and more people from different cultural backgrounds, racial backgrounds, economic class comes into the profession is going to become more diverse, and through that and becoming aware of the number of issues and needs that are important to us, it's going to have to become more holistic because we're aware of more things. So I think that I see that as a very positive thing. I think it's probably going to take some time. I see it already happening, maybe not as fast as I would like it to happen, but it is starting.
I know we had talked to Alfredo, and he had given us a nice spin, versing or opposing the Western society or what we perceive as the norm, and he had gave the comment that in Buenos Aires, the amount of students in their particular program that were women was 60%, and that the students, as well as the faculty, women students and women faculty outnumbered the men.
So it reflected each other.
Yes, and so I thought that was quite interesting, and we touched basically on some of the reasons why without getting in depth, but a lot of it had to do with cultural differences and things of that nature. And to touch base with what you had said, he found it to be quite shocking when he had come to this country that the amount of women, both in students and in faculty, was when I think he said he got here in 1981, I think he said, I'm not quite sure on that, but he said when he came to this country there was virtually no women in the profession, or slim to none, and the amount of students was even less, and he has gradually seen that increase, so that was quite interesting to hear you say that as well, that those numbers are increasing, but at some point in time in the past that they were not there, and that you guys have seen this change come about. So that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, in Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences, and what would be some of the similarities?
I think that, I don't know how different it would be, but women and men are definitely different. So somehow there's going to be, if it was dominated by females, there would be subtle differences, I think, especially, I think I've read somewhere where details are paid not necessarily closer attention to, but just like interior design, and that field is more detailed, and maybe that's just a stigmatism because females don't feel comfortable in architecture or something, so they tend to go to interior design, but I think there would be some changes somehow.
Second question is, given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in the typically male-dominated professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? If so, what kind of impact do you think this is going to have?
I think it's definitely increasing, especially if you look at the classes. I've gone up, our year we had a lot of girls, a lot of them dropped, but I've gone up the first year, and there's, a lot of girls, like our freshman year, we talked about 1/3 were girls now instead of it used to be a very minuscule amount, and I think that's changing, and I think I don't know how it's going to affect architecture as a whole, but I think we'll see some changes in pay rates and things, hopefully, so that women will get paid as much as men, because now it's not like that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, Kevin Russell.
Okay. If in Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? If yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of the similarities?
Well, you have to believe in yes. You have to believe in yes to answer this question.
Okay. Explain, please.
Well, if is a hypothesis and you make assumptions based on
Right. Okay.
your agreement with the premise of the problem. So first of all, I think that it's an unknowable thing. Okay. What we're doing is second guessing Mother Nature in a sense by asking, if it wasn't a male-dominated society, would architecture take on a different aspect? I think that it's something that is not possible for us to know at this time. If I conjured up on the basis of my beliefs concerning the different gender behaviors and different status sensitivities that gender brings to problems of such as architectural design, that it's a different problem, it's a different question slightly. And I think probably not. I think that men and women have very much of the same attributes to offer. And a design process. The fundamental key difference is that probably buildings would probably be more responsive to children, and that children's needs would be better served. And I point out the specific example of the Montessori school headed by Marie Montessori at the turn of the century. That environment is called the children's house. And the children's needs are served very elegantly there. Scale of everything is reduced. The entire character of the room speaks of the child. It is not an adult environment that is simply modified slightly to accommodate children.
How would you, spinning off of that, how would you say then that the person who designed that, how did they come up with that perspective? For example, if there was discrimination by design, whether it be by gender, by race, by social class, how then does one get that perception so that they can try and see what those spaces, to get into their shoes, to see what I'm asking? Because that is the breaking point of whether or not that discrimination takes place. That is where it will take place, is if that perception can be brought in by the designer.
It's not an easy problem because of the continuity of history and the influence and the power that history wields on us ideologically. The reason that it was very difficult for me to answer the first question was simply because of the continuity of history and the relationship of our evolutionary state to historical precedent. So it's a continuum of change and modification.
Speaking socially?
Socially also. There are predominant ideologies that are adopted by peoples, by cultures, through a complex web of mediation. That is the spread of the ideological set of ideas and values. And those things are controlled by the people who create the means of disseminating that information, such as the printing press, or such as radio, such as other kinds of things. So, in relationship to this other nuance of, how do we break the continuity of that, I think you have to collide with it. I think it requires a revolution, in a sense, quiet revolution or cataclysm is the question. And I prefer to think that it can be, that there's always some element of violence associated with it, because the tendency of people to go unchallenged and to remain unchanged, basically, or to isolate themselves in an intellectual boredom, if you will, an intellectual cocoon, is largely what people do. They, without some intervening force, without some intervening question. One very smart woman once told me, she said, well, I think that the issue is people have a paradigm, and that paradigm can be looked at as a spinning orb, if you will. And she said that she saw in creating change in people's consciousness to attach a wart onto that paradigm, and she was using something that had to do with the visage, where you have an image of your own face, and you put a wart on it, and so at some point, the image of your own face, you have to look at that wart. You have to see this wart, and is it ugly? Is it something that you want there? Or is it okay? You have to resolve it. You have to deal with it. And so this wart on the spinning paradigm, I like to look at it as a machine, in a sense, or a spirit spinning in equilibrium in the state of existence, and you attach this eccentricity, this little weight on the outside of it, and then it forces it to spin around a new locus, so it has to resolve that thing in terms of the total system. So you attach this wart onto the paradigm of those people, or those systems of thinking that raises severe questions that people can sit very idly by until they see a disturbing image, for instance, of a starving person in Somalia. The subtle improvement in gender relations and the recognition of special or needs that have been passed over by the existing power structures require also the same kind of subtle violence and subtle change in one's thinking. And sometimes those images need to be disturbing in some way. Right. Or maybe they need to be transcendently beautiful. Maybe they have to propose something that is a vision of a different system that inspires people to change. Right. It's another, and that's a difference that I prefer. In teaching, I use as many mechanisms as I can to intervene in the student's paradigm and create a paradigm shift that is a renewed consciousness, or an altered consciousness, if you will, that subsumes a larger set of variables within the universe of the student's thinking. And this issue of without creating such a state of instability where there's a violent reaction. So it's a delicate balance in that regard. And sometimes you cross over the line and get to violent action.
Right.
I do believe that students have a right to everything the professor has to offer, and so that the difficulty is not to be eaten, at the end of the class, at the end of the coursework, so consumed by your students utterly, and then disposed of at the end, at the end of that process. But nevertheless, that's the issue. I mean, the issue is to create a general state of instability where students are forced by nature of that instability to look for new possibilities and to look beyond their existing paradigms for other input. And in that, they become responsive, changeable beings, and they become also sensitive to external realities. And my feeling is that in the resolution of any prejudicial situation, that there will be a natural force for its resolution once that openness is achieved. That people are, by nature, they desire to be sensitive and to be good people, and desire to respond to other people's needs in a meaningful way. It's that they may be inhibited in that response by certain ideological frameworks that cut them off from their reality.
Okay. One other question. Given the number of women in school and increasing numbers in the typically male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, et cetera, increasing? If not, why not? If so, what kind of impact do you think that'll have on the 21st century?
Well, I think that the increased presence of women in professional programs is a natural evolution of the increasing sophistication of the society at large. It's women throwing off the shackles of their own ideological limitations, and it's also men being made aware of the capability of women to work in the marketplace and so forth. By the same token, it will see a shift in men finding more roles in those areas where women were looked at as being the sole, predominant forces. Men can be nurturing, and women can be dominant and aggressive.
Right.
And I think the issues that we want to really keep in mind are some of the roles or some of the areas that women are finding themselves now working in. Are the roles themselves appropriate for even human occupation? And are they, do we need to really redefine how business is done?
Okay.
Not just gaining entrance, by minorities such as women who have been minorities only from the standpoint of their being excluded from those systems, whether it's prejudice or apprehension that dictates that's obviously a mix of those things. But that we challenge the very role itself and how that job is done. For instance, in the contracting business, do we want to continue with an adversarial, in the building industry, do we want to continue with an adversarial framework for doing business, or do we want to reach out and form a circle and form a team of people interested in achieving a meaningful use of their time and their efforts in their Sorry to look at the camera.
Okay. In Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of architecture? If no, why not? And if yes, what would be the differences and what would be some of the similarities?
In a sense, that's a question, and hypothetically, that it's hard for us to even begin to do anything with except to begin to make some thoughts or reflect upon, based upon, because it hasn't existed. We are a patriarchal society, and so Western civilization is premised upon and built upon and derived from that condition. But I want to start with just a quote, and this is a quote from someone who has asked that question in reference to if there's a different way of processing information or a different way of viewing ourselves.
Okay, great.
And it's Jean Baker Miller who suggests that the ego, as traditionally defined and understood, may not even exist in women, and that has kind of a unique understanding as to then how performing a practice might take place based upon that condition. And she talks about patriarchal women, which we are being discouraged from gratifying their own needs and seeking fulfillment of their own, in a sense because they have to find themselves in such a way that they seek their gratification through others. And it's still, in a sense, affecting a relationship that's premised upon and built upon a relatedness, a diffuse relatedness in our existence, as opposed to a kind of superiority or dominance as a model. And the quote she makes is that, and this is from a psychoanalytical theory, so keeping that in mind, it talks more about psychology and the differences rather than direct applications here. But theories about women's weaker ego or superego may reflect the fact that women have no ego or superego, as these terms are now used. This doesn't mean that women do not have organizing principles to relate to a reality, in particular what they do, but that women's reality is rooted in the encouragement to form themselves into the person who will be of benefit to others. They thus see their actions only as those actions are mediated through others. And I think what's important about realizing or looking upon that as a kind of commentary is that perhaps if we revision architecture in a relational terms, that creativity is something that comes together through our energies being infused upon other energies that in a sense create some sort of synergistic whole, a new image could be encompassed, and through that a process of collaboration or cooperation would be a guiding principle where human relationships are brought together in more productive relationships, so that individuals receive energy and interaction through each other and bring order and disorder out of themselves through that process of coming together. And that's a different kind of model than the current drive of acquisition of power through unbridled competition. And the perceived necessity of those in charge to achieve dominance over others. So the hierarchical model, which is in existence today and operates in the way that we are educated, in the way that we go through the practice, and the way that we practice architecture, and of course the way that the buildings reflect in a sense, because the building environment is a reflection of that. The second part of the question then asked if there was a dominance of a way of thinking that in a sense embodied this more relational understanding of architecture. Would it have an impact on our built environment? Of course, I would say definitely yes, it would. It would have an impact on it because it would have an impact on the way that things were processed, the way that information was, in a sense, I guess, assimilated, and then the way that that information that was assimilated reveals itself in the built environment. It would definitely have an impact. I think that another comment that I'd like just to bring up to conclude this discussion is that Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, two architects who we're very familiar with in terms of their work and what they've done, and the kind of decision in the end of the Pritzker Prize for the award, it to a single individual, Robert Venturi, as opposed to a collaboration of which basically they're working bodies, in a sense maintains this belief that we have of the patriarchal world or this competitive world being dominant.
Right.
And so, you know, it's still in existence, and it's an opportune time for us to begin to expound that understanding. But Denise Scott Brown makes a very kind of poignant point, and she argues in the book Architecture, A Place for Women, and the article is The Room at the Top. She says, and this is particularly addressing how she is not being able to have own, you know, legitimacy within the practice of the collaborative effort be understood or revealed, shown, and that the critics particularly want to assign the work to a particular individual and then ascribe it to Robert Venturi. And so she's making reference to the fact that the necessity for us to assign a work, again it goes back to the ego, in the sense of to a single person, to have dominance and control, undermines any attempt to encompass a relational orientation. And in the article she writes about what she refers to as the pyramidal star system, which is what majority of the architecture practices today are built upon, which is something which is tiered, of course, and there is a person in control that has a dominance over the others, and the designer, of course, is the person at the top, the pyramid at the top. And it really has very little to do with the complex relations in architecture today or ever in this way. And but it continues to exist. She writes, as sexism describes me as a scribe, a typist, and a photographer to my husband, so the star system defines our associates as second bananas and our staff as pencils. So I guess I'd like to conclude that thought.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Okay. In Western society, if architecture was a female-dominated profession, would there be a difference in the structure and form of our public and private dwellings and spaces, as well as the practice of any of those design professions?
I'm sure, but since I'm not an architect, I can talk about the planning point of view. In our cities and communities, I think there has been a lack of attention to women in terms of the type of services they want, and also in terms of the government infrastructure or the systems of services that they are offering in the cities. But basically, in my studies, I've noticed that women planners have less demand in the marketplace compared to men, and they face a lot of difficulty and when it comes to setting out the ideas, because that there are not enough women, so the public services and facilities are not going to be designed as much as to the taste of women, because women don't have equal participation in the job market and also on the practitioners and planners.
Okay. Second question, given the number of women in school and the increasing numbers in other typical male professions, are the number of women seeking careers in architecture, planning, etc. increasing? If not, why not? And if so, what kind of impact do you think that'll have?
Yeah, we have, during the last 10 years, the number of women who have entered planning or in general environmental design schools have increased. But whether or not we have all these new entrants in the market, let's say that satisfied in terms of the job search. And that's the question that in most of the studies and most of the articles we want to find out. For example, I had a student presenting a paper on the role of women in the planning profession. And there is an interesting fact that women female planners do not have that much of job opportunities for men in the rural or small cities. So that makes it interesting because although women are entering the school as in the same proportion as men do, but the job market is not very favorable to planners. However, in metropolitan areas, we can say that similar to other types of professions, women planners have similar opportunity or even similar opportunities. But when it comes to other areas, small cities or areas that are basically rural, women don't have that much opportunity, and that's why in my studio project, what the students are attempting to do is to measure the factors that influence women's labor force participation. And if we have, let's put it this way, that if we have women planners in small cities, that definitely make a big difference in the lives of women who are entering the job market in such a massive rate.
Right, right. All right, well, thank you very much.